This week on Take One, I watched the 1974 film The Godfather Part II, directed by Francis Ford Coppola and starring Al Pacino, Robert Duvall, Diane Keaton, Robert De Niro, and John Cazale. Set both before and after the events of the first Godfather, the film tells the story of Don Corleone's rise to power while simultaneously recounting his son Michael's further fall from grace. As a young boy in Sicily, Vito Andolini attends his father's funeral with his mother when he receives news that the same mafia mob that killed his father has now killed his older brother. When his mother pleads to the mafia head, Don Ciccio, to spare her last son, he orders her killed. When Vito runs off, he orders him killed as well. Vito escapes to America and takes the name of his hometown, Corleone. Without money or family, he sets out to provide for himself and make his fortune. Michael Corleone starts the film in much the same way as Vito did in the first Godfather. This time, business interrupts the festivities of his son's first communion. The family has moved to Nevada, and Michael, as Don, is trying to keep the family fortune by strategic alliances, purchases, and assassinations. As time goes on, in an attempt to keep his father's legacy, Michael loses many people near and dear to him while trying to keep his crime family going. The thing that struck me most about the film, overall, is that not only does it continue the great style of storytelling from the original, but its narrative structure is one of foreshadowing, with promises made and kept quite intelligently and in the most effective and sometimes devastating way possible. A great example is in an early scene. We see Michael's brother Fredo's phone ring in the middle of the night. The caller is identified as Johnny, and the nature of the conversation, though vague, tells the audience that Fredo is in league with another organization. Later it is revealed that this Johnny is Johnny Ola, the right-hand man of a rival mob boss named Hyman Roth. Fredo tells Michael that he has never met Johnny before, when the two of them go to meet him at a New Year's Eve party. When Fredo lets it slip in Michael's hearing that he had actually talked with Ola before, Michael knows that Fredo has betrayed him to a rival gang. By a brief prior scene, the film makes us suspicious of Fredo's allegiances, so that his lie to Michael can be understood as Michael understands it, as a real betrayal. Michael talks with Fredo afterwards, and the latter confesses his past correspondence with Roth and his bitterness towards Michael being the Don and not him. Michael disowns Fredo, but says to his capo that nothing is to happen to Fredo when their mother is alive. After the entreaty of his sister Connie, Michael reconciles with the penitent Fredo at the funeral of their mother. However, as the two embrace, Michael looks to his capo with a grim expression, reminding us of their previous exchange, and that this reconciliation is not sincere, and Michael is determined that Fredo must pay for his unfaithfulness. Other moments of foreshadowing are more poetically significant than narratively. When Tom, the Corleone lawyer, goes to visit Frank Pettigelli in prison, the nature of the scene between them seems to indicate a rather long-winded way of Tom convincing Pentagelli that the Corleone family holds no hard feelings for his near treachery. However, when Pentagelli recounts how conspirators against the emperor in Rome would bleed themselves to death in the bathtub rather than be prosecuted for conspiracy, we know that by associating their situation with his, Pentagelli is not convinced of the Corleone's goodwill, and all is still not right. Sure enough, not long after, Pentagelli is found dead in his bath, bled to death. These are just a few of many examples of great foreshadowing in the film. The Godfather Part II tells its story just as personally and as powerfully as its predecessor, but juxtaposes the rise to power and crime of the first generation with the fall from power of the second generation, putting us, the audience, in the life of crime where normal domestic existence is impossible. Circumstance traps honorable people in dishonor, and two men, Vito and Michael, by the choices they make, fight for their survival and doom those around them to suffering. The Godfather Part II, though incredibly personal, creates an atmosphere and world for its characters to exist in, one of ferocious intensity and violence coupled with beauty and affection. Right off the bat, at the opening title, Nino Rota's haunting score paints the perfect mood with the sound of a single trumpet playing a mournful tune. The production design immerses with its beautiful simplicity and transports the viewer to two different countries and time periods through masterful attention to detail. The cinematography is gorgeous, as films of that time period were apt to be, but never showy. The camera shows only what it needs to show, and does so with simplicity and skill. Every aspect of the film points to the drama of the characters, and behind the drama are the actors. The weight put on the performances is exactly what should happen with a human drama such as The Godfather. Character is the most important element, and without the acting to show for it, the film drops. All the actors give wonderful and emotional performances, with standouts being Pacino, Cazale, Keaton, Duvall, and De Niro. De Niro deserves special recognition because of his ability to not only embody the character of Vito Corleone, but portray the younger and more naive side of his humanity. He was able to perfectly replicate Brando's raspy voice, albeit clearer and younger sounding, and little nuances like the way Brando would break eye contact or scratch his chin during a conversation. At the same time, he brought youth to the character. The look in a young man's eyes when he sees his first child, or when he first breaks the law, or when he is outraged by injustice. De Niro stayed true to Brando's portrayal and the character of Vito Corleone, while adding even more depth and humanity to the character. Both Vito and Michael live in this world, conveyed, not created, by writers Puzo and Coppola. They live in a world where things said and done by someone in anger or passion can cause the death of that person, where a man can be living his normal domestic life when suddenly gunshots fire on him and his family. They live in the hyper-reality of the mob, where everything done or said can and must have terrible consequences. Both Michael and Vito learn that to make or keep their fortunes, they must combat crime with crime. A moral high ground is impossible in crime when your adversaries disregard morals completely. This fact drives both men from a desire to be honorable into what they believe to be a necessary blindness to the moral ambiguity of their actions. The premise of The Godfather Part II is a tragic one. Treachery answered with treachery. Violence answered with violence. And a place where compassion is unprofitable. The chief dilemma that the film poses is the inevitability of circumstance. When a film about criminals and immoral people succeeds in humanizing its main characters, then the prevailing sentiment towards our less than heroic heroes is one of sympathy rather than condemnation. This pattern in crime and gangster movies is one that has caused concern with those who feel that ethics and morals should be clearly stated. Movies that cause us to identify with bad people can make someone want to imitate those bad people. While this may be true in some scenarios and with some films, the Godfather trilogy portrays what is real, and what is real is not desirable. When a film glorifies this morally questionable and tragic subject matter, then it is in a way telling its audience that what it portrays is normal, or at least acceptable. When a film portrays crime as it really is, then not only is it open for serious interpretation, but it shows the reality of the brutal lifestyle one has to live as a gangster. One reason I felt sorry for these characters, and especially Michael and Vito, is the nature of the circumstances they were born into. Vito's family was killed, and he was forced to flee to America at a young age. He tries to live his life right, while in a district ruled by the crime boss Fanucci. When his job is taken away from him because Fanucci makes the owner give the position to his nephew, and when he is unwittingly involved in a burglary, he looks toward the life of crime as possibility for the first time. Michael never chose the life of crime, and in fact started out against it. In the first Godfather, he tries to go legitimate by joining the Marines in World War II. It seems like fate is against him when his oldest brother dies, and he is chosen to be the successor of his father. Suddenly, Michael finds it his duty to ascend the role that is necessary for him to don, no pun intended, and begins the ruthless lifestyle that his father started to keep the family afloat. Each man seems to have been driven into crime against their wills, and it is heartbreaking to think of the consequences they face for it later. It is definitely not wrong to feel sorry for a person who does wrong, but the reality is that every step they took into their life of crime was making it harder to go back. Michael promises his wife that in 5 years the Corleone family will be completely legitimate, but with each choice to operate As the necessarily merciless head of the family, he confirms that the family must remain as it always was. Every time each man chose to repay crime with crime, they doomed themselves and their children to live the life of tension, fear, mistrust, and power. The goal of The Godfather Part II was to tell the further story of the Corleone family, but also to portray the journey of two men in the crime organization, Vito's rise and Michael's descent, and to show the humanity in the motivations and reasons for their choices. I believe Vito's goal, though never spelled out in black and white, was one of success. The state he was left in was almost utterly helpless, and his desire was to be someone and to make a name for himself, as he quite literally made the Corleone name for himself, and to ultimately provide for his wife and 4 children. In these respects, Vito succeeds. He becomes one of the most powerful men in New York, and he even gets revenge on the man who killed his family and tried to kill him too. And he earned the name Godfather. He keeps his sanity and soft-spoken demeanor for the rest of his life, and even though he faces trials with his family, he dies with his personal life intact and is able to enjoy his last years after he makes his faithful son Michael Don in his stead. However, even if Vito escaped a great consequence for his choices, these consequences would come upon his children. Michael's goal is to carry on the family business, no matter what it takes. He exacts his policies and commands for murders without second thought. For the sake of the business, finally, he has his brother killed. In his attempt to hold his crime family together, however, his real family falls apart, and in turn, his character. The main examples of this are in his final confrontations with his brother Fredo, which I've already recounted, and with his wife Kay. After returning home from negotiating a deal in Cuba, Michael meets with Tom, and Tom tells him that his wife has had a miscarriage. When Michael finally talks to Kay about it, she reveals that it wasn't a miscarriage, but an abortion. She had aborted the baby so that it did not have to be born into such a terrible life as Michael has. Not only is it a severe blow to Michael to know that he could have had a child, but also a great insult. Kay finally speaks her mind on her disgust with the life that they lead, and says that he will never be legitimate. In his anger, Michael strikes her, and the two separate from that day forward. By his attempts to hold on to the family business of crime, Michael's family splits, and at the end of the film, he sits alone, silent, and we, the audience, are left to reflect with him on the tragedy that is his life. The Godfather Part II is the pinnacle of the epic tragedy. At 3 hours long, it never feels slow-paced and never has a dull moment. The story structure is both intuitive and intelligent. Every production value is top-notch, and it won numerous awards for it. On top of all that, it is one of the best sequels of all time. It brings back everything that was good about the first, and provides a script just as, if not better written, and expands on the story of the original, meaningfully and masterfully. It is rather unique in the way that it expands the original both ways, before and after, and never feels disoriented or convoluted because of it. It is a great film in its own right. Heck, it even won Best Picture, but gets even better when viewed with the trilogy as a whole, especially with the original. It is exactly what a sequel should be while still maintaining the finality and complexity of a standalone film. With all of that going for it, every bit of its beauty, its violence, grandeur, and its tragedy points to the story and the characters at its center. There in its core is humanity, tragic and imperfect, yet a heart that beats life into a true masterpiece.